Are you going to live forever? No, I didn't think so. Are you afraid of dying? Well, you're in luck because today's episode, we're going to be talking about the fear of death. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That is Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
Danny, are you consciously afraid of dying?
Uh, I guess like sometimes
Hmm.
not. I mean, I don't really, not particularly. I don't know. It's weird because I know it's gonna happen. Like it's definitely 100% going to happen.
Yeah.
Like no matter what is figured out with science, no matter what happens, it'll definitely happen at some point. There's no getting around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think consciously could be the key word there because consciously or like logically not really afraid of dying, but there's still, like I still like jump out of the way of a car and I
Oh
still
yeah,
try and avoid pain and I do all this like I live a healthy lifestyle. So like all these things are based on fear of dying. But
yeah. Eat food and
yeah.
take care of it. Yeah, all these things. You were trying to prolong your life essentially, right? Or make
Hmm.
it yeah.
Yeah.
Did we have any fear?
But they say that the fear of dying has a lot of causes. Even I've been listening to some books on psychosomatic pain and medicine and stuff like that. How like that's one of the big causes of pain in people's lives is just fear of dying, getting older,
No.
different things like that that causes people psychosomatic pain.
Yeah, it's crazy how when we have, our fears can manifest into actual physical symptoms. And the same with depressions like that too, where it's really not necessarily a physical thing, but it manifests sometimes as physical pain and stuff. Even though because you convince yourself you feel that way, which is really interesting, like that you can
Mhm.
do that, Yeah.
Well,
And you start to feel it.
Pain is a really interesting book. For anyone who's interested, there's this book called The Divided Mind, which is pretty crazy because it's like one of the few books that really talks about psychosomatic medicine. And so like everybody's like, but your mind can't do that. Like you can't be in pain because of your mind. And it's like, yeah, have you ever been heartbroken? Like nobody stabbed you in the chest, but it hurts like a motherfucker. And so like it's possible
Yeah.
that your mind can cause some pain in the body. And while maybe it doesn't account for all pain, it is kind of an interesting question. And fear of death is one thing that he talks about, one of the causes for pain that sometimes people get, particularly like a lot of these age-related changes that people think that may or may not actually be causing the pain. It could just be a fear of death.
And you know what's interesting about that too, because I get that with the age-related ones, especially because the more you start thinking about it too, those are the kind of things where the more you think about it, the more it starts to become a reality, whether
Hmm.
it's real or not, and it can get really weird. Yeah, it
Hmm.
is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the fear of death makes us do weird things too, because tied to that is also the fear of not being important, not being remembered, not, just not existing anymore, or being part of the world. And so you see people also do a lot of things in their lives in an attempt to sort of you know, address that in some way, even though they really have no power over addressing that. Like you have no control, no matter what you do, on how people remember you, how long they remember you, anything like that. And you just have that's not your choice.
I think about that sometimes. Like, you know how like there can be freak accidents or whatever that just like wipe you out, like just I don't know, a
Oh
house
yeah.
falls on you or whatever. And it's like you try and prepare for things so that like people will be taken care of if you disappear, but then it's like, yeah, but eventually, you know, a year, 5 years, 10, 100 years, whatever, nobody will care. It doesn't matter.
No,
Like no matter what
no.
happens. It may be bad for a moment, but it really doesn't matter.
Well, and also, even if they do remember you, it's like they're not really remembering you. They didn't know you.
Mhm.
Yeah, we know of Plato and stuff because he of his works, but we don't know him. I'm not remembering him. It's only his the books that I have left, right? And the ones that survived.
Dude, and okay, we remember Plato, but what about the whole entire rest of the earth at that time? Nobody knows.
Yeah, yeah,
Every single other person alive at that time,
God.
and nobody knows. Yeah.
And
We
it's
just
and
remember
yeah,
one dude.
and most of the stuff we have that we make, dude, doesn't last that long.
Yeah.
In certain cases, it's just luck that something happened to be found that happened to still be around. Their stuff's happened to exist for whatever reason.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is kind of funny when you think
I
about it that
was
way.
thinking about that recently because like I just read 2001 A Space Odyssey and I
Oh,
was
that's a
like,
great book.
yeah, and I was like, yeah, like being alive during the year 2000, that's something like people remember that. They'll look back to that time. And then I was thinking, I was like, does anybody consider what happened the year 1000? And it's like, no. So why would anyone care the year
No.
2000?
Yeah. Well, that's just it though. It's like crazy because we're living through it. So to us it has all this importance. But that'll be the same for the people living in the future, right? That'll be important to them. The past will just be, some stories they tell and stuff like that. I mean, it won't be that
Hmm.
much. But it's interesting though, because the amount that people go through for that to try and you know, solidify some existence, some quasi remembrance in the future is very interesting.
Yeah,
Because like the lengths they go to trying to like set up things and I don't know, it's just really weird.
it's
And
freaking
what does it get
crazy.
us?
Nothing. Just a little, it's like we love control. And it's like it buys us a little bit of control, thinking that we have something taken care of after we die. But really, I mean, I've heard some enlightened people say that death is just like sleep, you know?
Well, I mean, what was it like before you were born? There you
It's
go.
pretty groovy. Yeah.
Probably gonna be similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny too, because like I always wanted like Sartre talks about, responsibility and freedom and like that choice, and he even mentions like that, like he even thinks that like there's times where like killing yourself would be the right choice. Like and in extreme cases, like example he uses like if you were like a Nazi soldier. He's that example of the guys like that were actually doing the killing in the concentration camps. Like, like he's like they could have killed themselves. They had a choice. So they, made an evaluation of that. And I always found it interesting because like is how much is our life worth to us? And how much of our values and are we willing to do just in order to stay alive? And is it worth it? In some cases. And
Well,
that fear
yeah,
of death is strong though, because people obviously didn't kill themselves. They did what they were told to do.
yeah, that's the interesting thing is like all of us can commit suicide whenever. And
Yeah,
and I remember one time you said something along the lines of like, yeah, you could always do that, so why now? And it's kind of an interesting
yeah.
way to think about it because even though we all could, it's like, well, why do it now?
It's like a last resort type measure.
Hmm.
You don't get any choices after that. But yeah, you could always do it. Conceivably, there's nothing stopping you. So like, yeah,
Hmm.
give it a
Yeah.
moment and think on it.
But also like what you were talking about earlier with like the death being kind of like before you were born or sleep or something like that. That's like the rational part where I'm not afraid of it because like sleep is oftentimes the best
Yeah.
part of my day.
It's like the rest. Oh, finally, I get to take a break from this. Jesus. Yeah, the long sleep. You know, yeah, it is funny. It's well, it is true. Like, I mean, I know nobody knows what it's going to be like. Obviously, the only reference point you have is before you were born, but we don't know. There was nothing, right? I mean,
Mm,
I kind of like Epicurus in that sense, where he says like, death is there's nothing to fear about death because it's the cessation of all experience, and if we can't experience, then there's no pain, there's no
mm,
pleasure, there's nothing, right? So death
yeah.
is nothing because there's nothing to experience in death.
I think what a lot of people fear is that they'll have stuff left undone, like things they didn't say to people, their bucket list, things they didn't do. And it's yeah. So I can see that, but it's like that should be the reason
Oh,
to
like
just do it now. Like don't
yeah,
leave
the
things
regrets.
unsaid with people. Don't have a bucket list. Just start freaking doing this stuff, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good, yeah, doing the stuff so that you don't have those regrets or you don't have those feelings, I think is a good way to kind of like help mitigate that fear of death, maybe. But
Hmm.
I think there's other people too that also like have a fear of not being part of the world. It's like more than just like,
Mm.
regrets like that. It's more like, their importance, they
Huh.
talk themselves up to being this important and now they're not going to be there,
Yeah. I wonder. What that just made me think of is like, I wonder if extroverts are more scared of death than introverts. Because it's like extroverts want to be part of the world. They want to be around with other people. Introverts are like, just leave me alone. I'll go read a book. Like, and it's like, I
Yeah.
wonder if more extroverts are afraid of death and introverts are just like, bring it.
They're like, you have
I'm
to remember
ready.
my name. Yeah.
Remember
Everybody must know
me.
me.
You remember Bender?
Remember me. Oh
Oh my
God, such a
God.
good episode.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Hmm.
gotta watch that show.
Oh my God, the first four seasons were great. Anyway,
Hmm.
yeah,
That was back when you had DVDs. Holy cow.
I
Long
know,
time
right?
ago.
Remember that? They were great.
Long
Get
time ago.
something, pay for it once,
I
never
know.
again.
Yeah. And actually have available what you wanted instead of hoping it was on Netflix.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like, I don't know, whatever. We can bitch
Hmm.
about that later, but
Yeah.
yeah, it is. I don't know, like it is funny how these like I always it's always interesting to me too how these like things that like we have no control over, like life and death, right? It's part of life. We all know. We see it all around us. Things die. It's just how nature works, right? It's like we know it's part of the world, yet it has such an influence on the things we do and the choices we make. And I always find that really fascinating that like there we know this is how the reality works, right? And like I said earlier, like even if even if like scientists figured out how to make people live forever, well, the sun's eventually going to blow up. Something's eventually going to happen where none of this will exist. So eventually, it doesn't matter. It's still the end result's still the same. You know,
And it's
it's like, and it's
also
interesting.
inconsequential. Like,
Yes,
I
very.
mean, just reading the sci-fi recently reminds me of that regularly, how absolutely inconsequential anything that happens here on Earth is.
Dude, I that's one thing I love about like sci-fi and astronomy and space in general is like when you look at like these distances, the vastness, just like and you start to really think about it, you realize how insignificant everything is. Like just the distances between things is so insane. It's like,
Yeah.
we don't know what the hell's out there at all.
Yeah,
No
it
idea.
takes you like lifetimes to travel between stars at the speed of light. It's like,
And
that's
you know,
insane.
and like, yeah, the likelihood is there's probably life out there somewhere else. And even if we were the only place with life on it, that doesn't necessarily mean that that gives us any more value. I mean, you know,
Yeah,
like
definitely not.
it's really
But
strange.
we certainly think it does.
Yeah,
And you know
yeah.
what? It's just funny how we care about all these things. Like, how we're carpeting the world in plastic. Like, as if it really matters because you know what? After this world explodes, it doesn't matter.
Well, it only matters in the immediate, I think. And even then, I don't think people care that much. That's the other funny thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you do then if the fear of death? How do you address it?
I think like Marcus Aurelius talks about, just think about it regularly. The Stoics talk about it. Uh, just it needs to, it
Yeah.
it should be something that's on your mind regularly because it's going to happen. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And I think the more you think about it, the better you're able to address it when it comes, but the more prepared you'll be for it.
I think that too helps because I mean, this is essentially very much similar. Like we're like being aware of it, accepting it, also kind of implies thinking about it a lot, right? And you have to like kind of like get the intellectual thought to like move over into practice, and how you really think about the world, what you're doing, all these things. And that requires kind of thinking about it a lot, right? To get to that point. So you keep reminding yourself. Because it's like our knee-jerk reaction is to kind of ignore it, I think, or just not think about it. So you have to keep kind of forcing it over and over. Meditation
Yeah,
is a good example of that too, because he does it like 100 times.
all the
You
time.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it also helps you to live life because a lot of us are scared of living life or fearful of the pains of life, of the challenges, the difficulties, whatever. Like, how many people don't even have a passport and yet what's the number one thing you want to do? Oh, I want to travel. It's like, do you have a passport? No. Well, come on. And it's like, yeah, but that's
Yeah.
hard. It costs money and you have to wait a few months. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. But once you recognize that there's going to be a certain death and you can address the fear of that death, all of a sudden the fear of dealing with the hurdles you need to get a passport may not seem so big.
Yeah. It would be nice if like, because I've mentioned, you always hear stories of people who like have a terminal illness and like changes their whole life, right? And it would be nice if like everybody could have that like conscious awakening, I guess I would say, sort of, to like without maybe without the other part of it, we just
Yeah.
have that like
I feel like
that
it would be like
recognition
the
that
1970s in America again, like sex,
yeah.
drugs, and rock and roll.
But
Yeah.
but it makes sense, right? Because it's like all of a sudden, like these people get smacked in the face with their mortality, and like they hadn't been thinking about it at all before then, and all of a sudden that changes everything. And I think that's a really good indication that we need to be thinking about it more because clearly, like if that's such a standard story that happens, which it is anecdotally, right? Then that means most people aren't living in a way that's consistent with how they should really be living because they're letting their fears of change, of success, of failure, all that stuff get in the way and stop them from doing things that they really should be doing.
Hmm.
You know? It's funny because I think that's part of the fear of death, right? We ignore death. So we think we're going to live forever. So we focus on security, comfort, and stability rather than like trying new things, doing things that we want to do, taking chances, taking risks, and like living a good life.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's a challenge because,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that,
at the end of the day, you're gonna die. And so I was just thinking of from What About Bob, that little kid Sigmund, who's like, I'm gonna die. We're all gonna die. And it's like,
yeah.
yeah, at the end of the day, we're all gonna die. And it really doesn't matter if you make something of your life or not, but it would suck to waste it. Like I mean, I'm fairly confident that if I was to die, if I was on my deathbed, I would be pretty confident in saying that, yeah, I pretty much did everything I want to do.
Well, that's good. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, and like in a certain sense, I mean, you can't waste it. You're going to live anyway. But like, yeah, in the sense of like living your best life or living a life that's right for you. Yeah. I mean, hopefully everybody would get to a point where they can say that, right? That would be great. Because that means at least you tried the stuff, right? That mattered to you, even if it didn't work out. I always am a big fan of that. I feel like at least if I tried it, that's better than wishing I had tried it, right? Even if a failure occurs, who cares? Like, at least I did it. And,
Hmm.
I think getting that point's hard though, because it is. It's difficult to like take chances on ourselves, take those risks to realize that this is maybe, not going to go forever. Cameron was big about that too, by realizing that, we all die and that there's nothing, I mean, for him, there's nothing afterwards. There's no belief in the afterlife or anything. He felt like, I mean, in a certain sense, it gives life both no meaning. It means it's meaningless, right? But it also gives it more meaning in the sense that we can make of whatever we want. And so it opens the door to kind of like making of ourselves whatever we want and
Hmm.
seeing it how we ever we want and taking those chances because really, what's there to lose? There's nothing to lose.
Yeah. Yep. Bingo. So we solved the fear of death for you today. There you
Think
go.
about it often.
Yeah, right. Meditate on it, maybe with the meditations. You know what? I was thinking about it today because like I was talking with someone about how I love reading the meditations, and they're like, "Oh my God, how can you read that?" And I figured out as two things. One, it totally depends on the translation because I read another translation of it and it was terrible. And
Oh
then
yeah, there's 100% there's terrible translations and stuff like that. Yeah.
two, it needs to start on chapter two. Because chapter one is just him thanking everybody, and it's like nobody cares. But chapter two is like begin the day by thinking that you're going to deal with the arrogant person, the ignorant
Yeah.
person, all that stuff. And it's like, oh, that makes sense. So, anyways,
No, there's lots of stuff like that though. I think a lot of philosophy too, especially books like that, it's starting where it's right for you too is kind of important. Because like,
mm,
well, like the Tao Te Ching's another good example. Like, and the Meditations are both good books, but like you don't have to read them straight through either. You can kind of jump in.
hmm
Epictetus handbooks like that, a lot of Nietzsche's works like that. Like you don't need to start at the beginning. You can kind of start in, almost anywhere. So yeah,
mm, yeah.
I agree with you there.
Sweet. So there you have it. The fear of death solved for once and for all. This is
All right.
if you enjoyed that, check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Watch us on YouTube. This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Andy.